Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another wonderful episode on the Trustworthy podcast. Today, we are so excited to introduce and welcome Emily Whiting, Head of Talent at Vannin Chief of Staff. Welcome, Emily.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
I am so excited that you're on the call with Susan and I today, and I would love to just start with asking you, tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you ended up here, and maybe a little bit of the role that trust played in your career journey to get to where you are today.
I have been a chief of staff for about the last 7 years. And a lot of people ask me, what is a chief of staff? And over the years, I think it's had a few misconceptions about the ambiguity around the role. But to me, it's a role that is the right hand to the CEO. And it helps the CEO become a better communicator. It helps them with the operational needs of the business, driving forward and measuring key priorities, and ultimately as a thought partner, a sounding board to a rather lonely position at the very top of an organization. You'll come across chiefs of staff, and there is a common thread. Most of them have a unique and winding road to get to that position, and I am no different. I started my career in advertising on the traditional side, buying billboards, and eventually found my way into more of a emerging technology, mobile ad tech. That was my first foray into the tech space. And I truly love the energy, entrepreneurial company, a startup environment. I had the opportunity to work with incredible leaders and wear a lot of different hats, running departments from account management, being an internal consultant for emerging technologies. I launched a program management department and then became the first chief of staff there. And I think it's in that company that I first got to understand the role that trust played in my own career progression. It's been over 10 years since I've had a supervisor or a boss that was co-located in my city. So having to build relationships with leaders over a video screen, or 10 years ago, it was just over a conference, call phone. We didn't do as many Zooms back then. But I think finding ways to build authentic relationships with people, whether they're in person or remotely, has been vital to my progression. I've been a chief of staff at other companies since then. I did a stint in change management consulting for a global commercial real estate company. And most recently with Vannin Chief of Staff, I run their talent division. So I'm head of talent. And I love speaking to passionate, talented chiefs of staff around the country and helping them find their home, the right fit with a CEO correctly. So that's a bit about me. I'm based in Pennsylvania. I have 2 young kids, and I love doing a job that I'm excited about, but I can do it on a flexible basis as well.
So, Emily, can I just jump in? And I'm really curious, knowing the role that trust plays in your world and in your life, and the role you believe it plays in your job. What about being a chief of staff appealed to you? Like, how did you make the leap from change management and, working in high tech and to literally saying, yes, this is where I want to be?
The initial interest started years ago. I was at a juncture point in my career and I wanted to decide what to do next. And one of the options was to go back to school and get an MBA. And I had a mentor at the time who said, it's my point of view that that's not needed. Let's get you in a role where you can get exposure to the broader business functions. And through trust and the relationship that we had built, he allowed me to take on this position as chief of staff for the first time in the organization. And I got a seat at the table. I got to see all the business functions, learn how to influence and negotiate at an executive level, and just get exposure to leaders I otherwise wouldn't have. So the chief of staff role is so unique, and especially now that I'm doing it on the recruiting side. Of course, I'm looking for people who meet the technical requirements of the role, but the most important thing is that chemistry. The CEO and the chief of staff have aligned values. Do they communicate the same way? You're essentially the shadow of the CEO. It is not like other members of the C-suite. So we have to make sure that that personality match is
Wow. I think so. One thing that Susan and I often talk about when we talk about our trustworthy framework is a step when you move from self-trust to building trust with one other person and really breaking down what are the agreements that we're making? What do we value? How do we agree to talk to each other in trust and have conflict in trust? Do you have tips or steps that you would take specifically to build trust with your executive?
Part of the Vannin Chief of Staff business is we help CEOs find their chief of staff. And we do that either in a full-time capacity or fractionally. Developing a framework or a routine around getting into a business, earning trust quickly, learning the company, and then delivering is really important. So there are a few key steps, and it actually starts with what we call aligning. So in the first 30 days, there is a bit of a discipline to not come in and want to fix or change things off the bat, but it's coming in and understanding the business, speaking their language, meeting with the CEO, what is your vision? And how do the processes, the tools, the people cascade from there? Another great way to come in and earn trust is going on what I call a listening tour. If a chief of staff comes into the business, it can be viewed negatively as someone who's a barrier between the CEO and the rest of the business. In reality, it's an accelerator. It can help better the flow of information between those two fields. But the best way to overcome that is doing a listening tour, getting to know people up, down, and across the business. Ultimately, they're going to be people that will help you be successful because so many of your projects are cross-functional. So those are a few things early on. I do like to set a cadence with my CEO. What are your typical working hours? I want to align my hours to you and your working style. When can we meet and have stand-ups? And what are our key priorities? One of my favorite tools is every Monday, let's meet. What are your top 3? So we're really on the same page. Ongoing though, I like to find other tools to bring trust and a bit of self-awareness to everyday meetings, especially in a remote setting. So one of the things that we like to do is every time you start a meeting, we're going to go through a red, yellow, green exercise. And the discipline here is making sure that people aren't going into too much detail, but just tell me, how are you feeling? Red, yellow, green, maybe it's a yellowish green or an orange, but it tells everyone on the call, how ready are you to participate in this meeting? Do you have distractions at work? Do you have ailments at home? And, meeting to meeting, that may be different for someone, but I think it helps to build trust because we're more open and we're more aware and perceptive of the attention that someone's going to be able to give in a meeting. So those are some of my tips for building trust with my CEO, the organization, and then kind of keeping that top of mind as I go through the work.
And what I love about that is that so many individuals in our audience aren't chief of staffs, right? And they still have their managers and their leaders. Many of your ideas and your tips and your advice will work with any manager, aligning, understanding what's important, getting the priorities, in sync, understanding how your work style comes together or doesn't come together. And I love the red, yellow, green idea in terms of reporting out where you are in that day and in that week so that you can optimize your performance and optimize how you're working together.
Yeah, it's essentially a bookend to a meeting. We may start with that, but ideally in this chief of staff role, if you're the one responsible for running meetings, you're going to want some feedback. So if we have time, I'd love to close the meeting by saying on a scale of 1 to 5 or 1 to 10, how effective and efficient was this meeting, so that I'm also getting feedback. I'm coming in, I'm learning the business quickly, I'm recommending changes, but ultimately these are pilot programs. I want your feedback so that I can make things better for you. So ideally bookends to those meetings are just really simple ways to build trust and two-way dialogue.
That's fantastic. Really, really helpful and practical tips. Thank you so much for sharing that. One thing you mentioned before was your experience in building relationships while you're in a remote role. So I'm curious as to if you have strategies or just interesting experiences in building relationships virtually.
This is more personal than it is a framework or a tip on a broader scale. I think over the years, you have to learn how to bring a level of authenticity to every meeting that you're in. if you don't know yourself, if you don't have a level of self-awareness, I don't think that you can really open up and show that to your colleague, your boss, or someone that you're managing. So I think it does start with you. And perhaps then your openness will be reflected back by the people on the other side. I guess more tactically, it's also important to set some very clear deliverables for yourself and make sure that what you're communicating, you can follow up on. So showing some consistency. We talked about bookends for meetings. Let's start the week with the top 3. End of the week, I'm going to send you a quick recap of where we are so that everyone's on the same page. I think that's worked for me over time.
You had this one, Emily.
Yeah, I just feel like that's so much more of a personal stance and just takes a lot of, I think, maturity and self-reflection to understand who you are and how you can bring that over a video screen, because it can erode self-esteem a bit more. You have more opportunities to be in your head, less data and body reactions to go off of. So it just takes a bit of personal work.
Well, and I also think that one of the things that works really well in building trust is for people to be heard. And the fact that you have your listening approach and you go on your listening tour also sets you up as somebody that's not only going to listen, but the people that you're interacting with are going to be heard and they're going to feel heard. So I think that probably helps in your remote environment as well in terms of building trust.
So much of what we do is implementing change, and it is sometimes difficult to share a concept with a leader. I typically work with high growth tech startups, and it is a difficult message to say sometimes we have to slow down to go more quickly. And what I mean by slowing down is we need to make sure we're bringing people along on this journey. Here are some perspectives across the business. Let's do that because it will help accelerate the change down the road. And oftentimes the pushback I get is, I don't want too many cooks in the kitchen. Well, the reality is, let's give people a voice. It doesn't have to equal a vote. But I do think that that is a critical component to seeing the results you actually want in the end and bringing people along on the journey.
Couldn't agree more. Has there ever been a situation where building trust felt difficult?
Again, the chief of staff role, which is where I've typically come from, is such a personalized position. And I have worked in the role embedded in an organization, but I've also worked fractionally and supported a variety of clients. There is one instance that comes to mind where I was supporting a high growth tech organization. And in coming on, I think I began to realize very quickly that my ways of working and my values were not necessarily reflected in the way that that business operated. For example, as a fully remote business, there was a policy in place that suggested you don't show up to work at the office, you show up to work on Slack. And I do appreciate that sentiment, visibly showing people that you're present throughout the day. They also had a desire to move very quickly, as most, growing organizations do. So because of that, they said that every interaction you have on Slack cannot be in a private message. Someone else has to be in the chat. And I think just to make sure that there aren't silos of information. The challenge I had with that is that all positive feedback was public, but at the same time, all constructive feedback was public. And that can create a bit of inconsistency. And it caused for me some feelings of anxiety, not knowing what I was going to show up to that day. So because of that, I quickly realized I don't think that there's values alignment here. I'm not able to build trust because I'm not sure what I'm going to get coming back at me hour to hour, day to day. And what I've learned is it's really hard to change people. Of course, there are frameworks in place to rebuild trust, acknowledging what pillar of our trust has fallen down. Let's set check-in points to revisit that. In this fast-moving organization, that was not a priority. And so the best thing for me to do was to say, I respect the way that you work. I work differently. Let's find another way to support each other, but it's probably not in this direct of a relationship. And that's okay. You can't change everyone, and a founder or a CEO has every right to run their business the way that they do.
I have a question, a follow-up question to that. you were able to, you had enough self-awareness and self-confidence to say, this isn't right for me. And what was the culture like? Not everybody can do that, or not everybody feels free to do that. So did you see things happen or people react, or what was trust like as a culture
Mm.
in an environment where everything was that shared in public?
I think then the constraint they had in operating in that way was the fact that they needed to be incredibly, incredibly rigorous with their recruitment process. If they have a point of view or a philosophy for how they run their business, and that's not going to change, they interviewed probably at least 10 times more people than any other organization would have to find people that understand that way of working and invite that level of rigor and feedback on a regular basis. So at least that's what I saw for them, which I think is great. It just wasn't for me.
I have a little bit, and then Chris, I'll hand it over to you, a little bit of a different question on to build on that. Did you find that people were honest in their feedback, both positive or negative, in the fact that it was public? So trust is built on honesty and being genuine and authentic. In that environment, how honest was the communication?
I can't say for sure, but I did have people coming to me directly to have one-on-one video conversations. So I felt as
Okay.
though that's where I got the real truth.
Fair. I mean, I think it's really, really wise that you had a look internally at yourself and said, hold on, where are my values? Where do I sit here? Is this the environment that I want to be in and thrive in? Or do I look for another environment where I feel like I can thrive more and it's more aligned to my values? So kudos to you for identifying it and also for taking action, because sometimes we get stuck in action as well. So that's a big step. I think there's another area of business that I think this creeps up a lot, and it's in the area of trust and confidential information. So sometimes in our roles, whether you're a chief of staff, whether you're a people manager, whether you're a leader in a different work stream, you have access to confidential information that's coming down the pipeline. There might be a big change, but you can't share it. You're not allowed to share it, at least not yet. You can't share that with your teams, with your employees. What's your perspective on how you can still foster trust when you've got hold on to that information?
I love this question. Like I said, I work with a lot of early stage companies, and in those stages, I'm also working with founders or co-founders in developing their vision and, more importantly, their values. And to me, values are, what are the boundaries of what you should and shouldn't do day to day? They really guide your decision making in any scenario. And I've found myself discussing with founders, they want to have a value that says we default to open, we want to share with transparency, but then they grapple with what that means when it comes to sharing information to the broader company. And what I say to them is, there are different ways to interpret your values based on who you're having that conversation with. With co-founders, defaulting to open means it should all be on the table. No secrets between the two of you, total trust, total openness, don't hide anything. But when it comes to maintaining that value with the broader organization in messages that are difficult to hear, I like to also say, being transparent doesn't equal sharing the most brutal version of the truth. There are ways to share the information that people need to hear without instilling unnecessary fear or without sharing an action plan on how to overcome that. So that's something I coach my leaders through. And one of the tools I use is just a very simple stakeholder map. Who are the stakeholders? What's important to them? What do they need to know now, next, later? And who's delivering that message? Ultimately, I try to empower my leader to deliver the message, if it's sensitive in nature, as best they can, and then make sure that their deputies can repeat that messaging. So, they're hearing something consistent throughout.
Fantastic. How about emerging technologies? That's another hot topic in business. I don't think we are ever going to slow down when it comes to emerging technologies, because the world's getting faster and faster. And with the democratization of knowledge, more and more talented people around the world are just jumping into tech and the opportunities that it brings. So it can also instill fear. And so I'm curious about your perspective around how might emerging technologies impact trust?
In the chief of staff role, one of our biggest opportunities here is to what we say amplify my CEO. So, how do I maximize their time, their influence, and their communication? How do I prioritize what they're working on? Sometimes maybe I'm drafting messages on their behalf in their voice. And truthfully, AI is a huge helper in allowing me to do just that. I've seen a few companies who are looking to roll out kind of an enterprise AI tool. And I think without the proper framing for the business case for doing that, without identifying how AI can be used, what are the do's and don'ts, and ultimately, how can each team use this their own way, I do think that's where the fear comes from. Will AI take over my job? In reality, probably not, but it's going to help you focus on the things that are most important. So if you have routine communications that need to be drafted, how can AI learn your voice and help you write those? If you have to produce templates, AI could be a huge helper there as well. If you have a long email that's sent to you, one of my favorites is to put that email and ask AI to summarize the key points for me so that I can use my time more efficiently and respond to the true important components that were communicated to me. So it can be an amplifier, but again, it comes down to just framing it in the right way, deploying training effectively, and leading from the front to make sure that people aren't afraid of these changes in the long run.
I love that. I absolutely love that you're embracing AI and you're encouraging the embracing of AI to be effective in our day to day. Whether you're a chief of staff or whether you're someone who's working in a team, the example that you gave in terms of summarizing an email and helping to respond with the same maybe voice or tone, such a great way to let the AI do what it needs to do so I can focus on what's really important. And it's the relationship behind this communication.
Yeah, what's the phrase? By focusing on less, you can actually accomplish more. If I can take these things off my plate with the use of a tool like AI, I can actually deliver more value to my CEO and to my organization.
It's really leveraging your strengths and letting the AI take care of some of the stuff that's more administrative, more summary, more, give me some ideas that I can think about so that you can actually leverage what you're really good at. That really helps everybody.
Of the examples that you've shared with us so far, if you had to pick one trust hack to bring into every meeting, what would it be?
When I'm building trust with my CEO, it's just being a listening ear. It is a very challenging role to be essentially a product in your own right. You are a brand in yourself. So what is your outlet? And in so many ways, I hope to be that outlet where you can share what's top of mind for you. And that's me just showing up and proving to them that I can be a confidential source, but then act on anything that they specifically want action on. So that's what's coming to mind for me right now.
Actually, I love that. And so maybe you could elaborate more on that in terms of how do you become that confidential source? Like what's important to you? What steps do you take? If you could maybe set that up as a hack. And I think you framed it a little bit as listening, but maybe develop that a little bit.
Yeah, I think the steps would be I have to understand what their vision is. For these founders, their vision is so personal to them. They have put it all on the line to start this business. So really understanding where they want to go and consistently showing that I'm delivering on that vision is kind of number one. I'm actually seeing a trend in the number of people who are looking for chief of staff roles are former CEOs themselves. And they're highly qualified because they can walk alongside a CEO they've done the role before. I find that fascinating. But yeah, understanding the vision, showing up consistently for them, and then trying to find ways to kind of mirror their communication style, I think can also build trust.
There's two quick questions that bubbled up as you were speaking. And it was, when you're starting to build trust with your leaders, what do you need to let go of personally?
The first thing that came to mind was a facade. We talk about in order to really build trust, there is a level of self-awareness. And I'm actually finding this in the CEOs that I'm working with who are looking for chiefs of staff. The ones that are the most successful at finding the right pair and ensuring that this chief of staff can succeed are the ones that are the most self-aware. They know where they excel, they know where their gaps are, and therefore they can go after the right talent to complement them. So I think in reverse, me as a chief of staff, I have to let go of trying to be something that I'm not. If I can show up authentically and know that we can be a team together, I know my strengths, I know their strengths, and how we can be one whole team, I think is what I found to be really successful in the end.
Great. I love that. I love that. And then a second curveball question is, these days, the perception of what a CEO or a chief of staff looks like is completely diverse. There's no one size fits all. There's no model. Anyone could be a CEO. We all have the ability to create and develop our own businesses. So are you seeing differences generationally in how CEOs who are, very tenured in their careers or just starting out, in the differences in how they build trust or expect trust?
So yes, and I can speak to CEOs who are on the earlier part of their leadership journey, because I think in the pandemic, we saw such a growth in the demand for the chief of staff role. And if we peel back the layers, I think one of the biggest factors in that was the fact that the barrier to entry for entrepreneurship was so low. Like you said, everyone was starting businesses. Everyone was rethinking what they wanted out of their career and capitalizing on opportunities to work from home. So we saw more first-time CEOs enter the space, and they were looking for more seasoned business leaders to help coach and mentor them, but also drive their vision forward. And what I'm finding from those younger CEOs is that they, in some ways, not all, have less patience. So it is so much more important to establish what you're accountable for up front, be very clear on what you will deliver and the timeline in which you'll do it, because there's a little bit more micromanaging going on, because this is the first time that they're inviting this type of person to support them in their business. And maybe they don't have as much delegation or managerial experience. So this is an opportunity for me to come in and say, I see what you're doing now. For your business to grow, let me help you let go of some of the more administrative things and focus on the areas that you're really strong that actually advance the company. So in showing, in taking some of that off their plate, hopefully you're showing trust that they can evolve their role, evolve their focus, and grow as a leader within their own company.
Fantastic. Okay. I love that.
But thank you for that, Emily. That was beautiful. And that was really important. So thank you for those thoughts. I loved ending on that.
Yeah, this was fun. This is not something that I get to stop and reflect on most days. So this has been a real treat.
So thank you, Emily, so much for spending the time with us to talk about trust, to talk about what it means in organizations, or developing relationships with leaders, CEOs, chief of staffs, and how trust really weaves its way through every single interaction we have in our personal and professional lives. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And we hope you had a great time with us.
I did. This was such a relevant topic to touch on, and one that I often get a time to sit and reflect on. So I'm leaving this energized, and thank you for the opportunity.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.